Hello, everyone. Today's CGIU webinar podcast is Raising Money, presented by two CGIU alums, Samir Goel and Abbey Wemimo.
Hello, everyone. My name is Abbey Wemimo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samir Goel. Abbey and I are proud CGIU alumni and the co-founders of Isusu.
CGIU has played a pivotal role in our journeys, and we could not be more excited to pay it forward, sharing our experiences with fundraising. We're very excited to tell you about how to fuel your commitment to action, get good funding for it, and at the same time, maintain your mental health while going through the journey.
Thanks, Abbey. So as mentioned, we're super excited to share our journeys with you and our key lessons learned. Just to give you a high-level overview of what we'll be covering today, we want to delve into fundraising and provide each of you with the tactical guidance to help you best raise capital for your respective commitments to action. Today, we'll kick off by sharing a little bit more about our personal backgrounds and journeys, take a deep dive on our fundraising experiences. Following that, we'll discuss when to start fundraising, some of the options available for fundraising, and how to choose the right path amongst them, how to prepare for fundraising before, during, and after the process. And at the end, as Abbey mentioned, we'll touch on our mental health and wrap up with some, recap tips for successfully fundraising. With that, I'll pass it over to Abbey to share a little bit about his story and really dive in on some of his unique fundraising experiences.
Thanks a lot, Samir. Before we take a deep dive talking about our fundraising experience and how you can be successful at raising money to fund your commitment, it's important to take a step back and just let you know, a little bit about my personal story. For me, I grew up in the slums of Lagos, Nigeria. I had the opportunity to come to the United States to get a good education and had the opportunity to start my career in entrepreneurship, which CGIU helped fuel and propelled forward. My career started working on a water infrastructure project for the Clinton Global Initiative Commitment in 2014, where we were building water infrastructure for a Ghanaian school of 5,000 students. This CGIU commitment was a life-changing one because we were able to raise capital from New York University faculty and staff. I was able to come up with a strong fundraising plan and couldn't just be more excited to share more about the tips and the lessons learned around the journey. I'll pass it back to Samir to share a little bit about his background and his commitment to action.
Thanks a lot, Abbey. So as far as my personal background goes, I grew up in an immigrant family from New Delhi, India, and kind of got my exposure to fighting for social justice issues through the stories of my parents. When my father first moved to this country, he was mugged, and we kind of started out in America with, no money and nowhere to go. And just some of those early experiences helped kind of guide my passion for solving social justice issues. Fortunately, I was able to get my start, like Abbey, in 2014 with the Clinton Global Initiative University Commitment to Action, where we were building a food waste company called Transformation, where we would work with events around New York City and ensure that extra food goes towards homeless shelters and soup kitchens. And what was particularly noteworthy was CGIU is the first kind of organization to take a big bet on us and really highlight our work. And through that, we were able to secure additional grant funding and additional individual donors. So that was really core to my experience learning how to fundraise, specifically from the perspective of a nonprofit social enterprise. Subsequently, Abbey and I also met at that CGIU conference, stayed in touch, and a couple of years later began working on Isusu, which is a for-profit social enterprise, and got exposure to a whole another avenue of fundraising with Isusu, where we chased venture capital over the past couple of years. And fortunately, this August, we were able to close our seed round of approximately $1.7 million, prior to which we had raised $300,000 of venture capital. And so, Abbey and I are excited to share both our experiences raising from the nonprofit side and our experiences raising from the for-profit side, with a focus on scalable social enterprises. With that, I'll pass it back over to Abby to discuss, how to think about when to begin your fundraising journey.
Thanks a lot, Samir. So when you think about your fundraising journey, the best advice is always to start as early as you can. Even further, it's the best time to start is yesterday. From a fundraising perspective, one of the biggest things you need to think about is it is really rooted in relationships. Wherever you're going to ask for money, in most cases, should have an idea of what your commitment is all about, or who you are as a person. At this stage, people are investing in you as a person to help move the frontier of a particular idea forward. And your idea, given the current construct of the CGIU community, probably does have the impact to impact to have a positive impact in the lives of many. So when you think about fundraising, there are really three things to really note down when you're starting. Number one, build strong relationships. Don't make raising capital a transactional process, and don't wait till you're ready to raise money before you start, building relationship with the institutions or the individuals you want to go ask for money. Number two is when you think about starting fundraising, you need to think about a team, right? So you're definitely not good at everything, and we understand as you're thinking about your commitment to action. You might not have full-time employees, but you can leverage the power of volunteers to really make your commitment and your fundraising strategies a strong one. So getting a team of people that can help you, gather the list of people you're going to approach. Plus, think about ready-made thank you letters when you do have an ask for them is really, really important. And number three is just to make sure when that timing is right, you need to be ready. Making sure you're ready with all the right materials in place to go out there to ask people for money, or to do a fundraising Kickstarter campaign, or even if it's an Indiegogo campaign. You just need to make sure you build the right relationships, you have a good team around you, even if you don't have a full-time staff. And number three, try as much as possible to have the right tools and be prepared before you go out there. I'll pass it back to Samir now to talk a little bit about, some of the different avenues of fundraising we chose during our path to raising money for our commitment to action, and at a high level when we did our venture raise.
Thanks a lot, Abby. So for many of you working on your commitment to action, one of the biggest challenges you'll see is there's so many different avenues to determine how to raise capital, right? There's everything ranging from crowdfunding campaigns like Indiegogo, Kickstarter, or even GoFundMe. On top of that, there's kind of the more standard nonprofit fundraising vehicles like institutional grants or reaching out to corporate philanthropy offices for corporate social responsibility funding. And then beyond that, there's kind of the venture fundraising route where, someone will make an investment in your company for a stake of the equity. And then there's, out of those three kind of key buckets, which I would high level categorize as individual fundraising, institutional fundraising, or venture fundraising, there's all sorts of, instruments in between, such as a PRI, which is a kind of hybrid between a grant and a venture capital fundraising. But to keep things simple and kind of straightforward, we'll focus on these primary three buckets. And in choosing this, I would think about a combination of what is feasible and also what type of business you have. And so when thinking about, raising money from individuals, one of the things you want to think about is what type of story or business do you have, right? Is your commitment to action really maybe a product for individuals, or is it something that has a really captivating story where people you reach out to will feel personally compelled to contributing? Will your organization be more successful if you can reach a large audience, right? That's when individual fundraising campaigns have a lot of impact, because even if you're not able to raise as much from each individual donor, the value of the outreach, the marketing, the additional kind of reach that you get from pursuing that avenue has a lot of value. And so this was one of the avenues that we chose with Transformation. And I think one of the reasons we chose it is we were tackling the issue of food waste and had a story around corporate events or venues where there's all this extra food that's left over. And that was an experience that a lot of people could resonate with. Right? A lot of people had been to an event and probably thought, wow, there's so much extra food here that's being wasted today. I wish I could have done something about that. And so one of the things that we always found was fascinating is whenever we shared what we were building, people were like, oh, I think about that all the time. And so because we found that a lot of individual people would have a personal connection to what we were building, that really made it a good fit for a crowdfunding campaign. Now, on the converse, the thing with a crowdfunding campaign is there's a lot of tactics to individual donations that we'll cover a little bit down the line, but you want to be really thoughtful in how you plan out one of those campaigns and not just throw up a landing page and start. You really want to do some of the work in advance. And what that means is exactly what Abbey said, which is build your relationships early, let people see you on the journey, and kind of lock in some individual donors before you even start your campaign. That way, when you do hard launch, is what it's called, people will see that you're coming at them from a point of kind of winning or being successful already. People like to contribute to what they call winning campaigns when it comes from a crowdfunding perspective. So, if you launch your Indiegogo and you already have 1,000 or a couple thousand on there, it's much easier to get people to donate than if you're starting at zero, because people are worried that you might not be able to hit your goal or raise enough money. And so the takeaway there is, you should really see if you have a business that will resonate with many individual donors. And if you do, make sure to do the planning to set this up in advance so that you can start off with some quick wins that encourage other people to contribute to your campaign. Secondly, I'll move over to the other bucket I described, which was essentially nonprofit grants and corporate social responsibility. This is a good strategy if you have a business or corporation that aligns really well with specific corporations or nonprofit funders, kind of avenues of funding. And so what that means is, are there nonprofits that are really, really hyper-focused on the area of need that you're serving? Are there corporations where either the executive team or their mission vision statement aligns with the problems that you're trying to alleviate? That's when those strategies can be really helpful. What is sometimes largely time-consuming but less helpful is just submitting a grant to every single kind of large corporate donor, because usually people are very selective in what they pursue and really issue-driven. And so if you want to kind of make the most of your time, you want to identify, are there organizations that really align with what our mission and what we're trying to solve for is? And if so, then really strategically think about how to submit grants or proposals to them. This is where some of the points that Abbey mentioned are also important. Like, you really want to do the legwork of having a compelling grant proposal. You want to take advantage of resources to have people review and give you feedback so that when you do submit it, you get the biggest bang for your buck. And this is also where team members are really valuable. So if you happen to be able to bring someone in that has experience with grant writing or nonprofit fundraising, that's always helpful. Or if not, you want to kind of bring people in that cover other areas so that you can focus really heavily on this, because the trade-off is, while this is more money, it is also more time consuming. So the other bucket that we just discussed is the raising venture capital. And this is most typically an option for-profit social enterprises. And this is really dependent on whether you see your organization as something that can scale to reach hundreds of millions of people and be a highly profitable but also highly impactful organization one day. And the reason for this is just the fundraising model of venture capital. They want to see businesses or social enterprises that can 100x. And so if you're really focused on a project that's hugely impactful but at local scale, which I want to reiterate is extremely important, you might not want to consider venture, because they're going to want you to be thinking world domination, quote unquote. They're going to want to see that you want to touch lives across your country, maybe across your continent, or maybe across the world, right? And so it really depends on what your vision for your business is. The bedrock of the American economy with many other countries is smaller businesses and smaller nonprofits. And so if that's the vision that you have for your organization, venture capital probably isn't the right route for you. On the other hand, if your desire is to scale exponentially, then venture capital is another option to consider. And That's really the primary consideration there, is like, how much do you want to scale as a business and what's the total radius you want to have? And in the impact world, right, there's kind of breadth and then there's depth. And so if you want to build a hyper localized solution that has a lot of depth and really is transformative, you probably want to look at individual donations, nonprofit grants, corporate philanthropy. And if you're thinking about breadth and touching many, many, many different lives, that's when you really want to look at venture capital. And a few things to note about venture capital is that, beyond just having really strong social impact, which is important, you're also going to need to show that you have a viable business model and scale. So while you should always be building relationships, as Abbey mentioned, you also want to make sure that before you raise venture capital, you've put in some thought to how your business can be self-sustaining and growing without kind of needing to always raise capital. And so that's really the primary thing. Is in traditional nonprofits, you're only thinking primarily about your social bottom line. Obviously, your finances matter, but from an investment standpoint, in the for-profit venture route, venture capitals will put as much of a premium on your essentially your profit model as they will on your impact model. And so you need to really think crystally about both of them, validate it, and then pursue that avenue. So that's a little bit about some of the options and what some of the differentiators are and how to think about them. I'll now pass it back over to Abbey to discuss how to prepare for fundraising before, during, and after the process.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Samir. So when you are preparing for fundraising, I think the two things that you should focus on. I talked about it earlier. It is important, and I'll continue to iterate it, the power of relationships. So making sure that you're building relationships way in advance before you need it. And number two is really having a good story to tell. Everyone believes or enjoys or likes to follow a good story, and people like to get behind an idea they think can have a fundamental impact in the world. And that's done through storytelling. The greatest ideas and the worst mischiefs in the world have been told through stories. So humans, that's the way we think. So let's take a step back and think about the tactical things you need to do. Number one, to prepare for fundraising. So the biggest thing is, after having the solid base of relationship, establishing good rapport with people you want to go out there to raise capital with. Could be individuals, could be, the social impact capital Samir talks about, or the venture capital. You need to have a list. So from fundraising experience, you can gather a list of, 100 with the expectation you're going to have 20% conversion or even less. So thinking through and taking a step back and creating an Excel spreadsheet and documenting, 1 to 100 people or companies you want to approach to raise capital. Very, very important, because you need to be prepared before you go out there. During that process, you rate the probability of the folks you think you're going to get capital from, or the institutions. And then the third thing is creating what we like to call the job aids and the playbook. So these are the ready-made emails, the marketing campaigns you're going to push out there, the text messages you're going to send to your friends to help you, when you're doing a crowdfunding campaign, for example, or, the little blog you're going to ask a friend of a friend to forward to someone you'd like to get an introduction to, or, them actually pitching on your behalf because they do have those relationships. So having these resources is important, and then it flows into the big story. So you need to take a step back and think about, what is the impact your idea is trying to have amidst the cacophony of ideas in the universe. Everyone is trying to do something, and there's definitely nothing new under the sun. By that very fact, you need to find ways to differentiate yourself. And this is where you rely on the power of storytelling. So you need to ask yourself, why you? Why now? And what is the fundamental premise and the reason why funders or investors should get behind your idea? So an example for me for the Clinton Global Initiative, um, university commitment to action for me was I was raising money to build water infrastructure in schools in West Africa, Ghana. And my story was simple. I always go to funders and say, hey, my name is Abbey. I grew up in the slums of Lagos, Nigeria, and I almost lost my life to typhoid. So that's a relevant story when you think about, not having access to water. And that's why I do what I did then for the commitment to action. So when you go out there, your personal passion or one reason why this clicks for you, people are excited about funding your idea. And it doesn't stop there. I haven't told them that this is why I'm passionate about this idea. Then I tell them, hey, we're going to West Africa, Ghana, particularly in schools, to build water infrastructure so there'll be a sustainable approach and then there'll be a continuous maintenance culture as opposed to the status quo of the infrastructure being built in random villages where where the water projects can actually get broken. But this is how we differentiate ourselves. So being able to take a really strong point of view and how you're different from others is really, really important. And after that, impact is big. Everyone wants to understand, the power of what they're backing and the real metrics or in a data-driven world. So in our case, we talked about the fact that we had 5,000 students in this school, and then there are other community members, approximately 25,000 of them that would have indirect impact. So being able to quantify your impact and showing that end-to-end ability. And this is how the story pieces together. Right? Abbey, a kid from the slums of Lagos, Nigeria, that almost lost his life to typhoid, and now is going back to build water infrastructure in schools so students, regardless of where they come from, can get access to quality education and then have access to clean water and not die of malaria or tuberculosis. Or that little girl that comes to school would have access to a water infrastructure and not have to skip school, during a menstrual cycle. Those are the stories people want to hear. And the impact is a direct impact is going to be 5,000 people with access to water and indirect 25,000 people in the community. So just by the very virtue of using, my personal story, talking about the impact and talking about how we're different really sets us apart. And that's how we were able to raise, over $20,000 to implement a CGIU commitment to action, which led into multiple scale, working with the Ghanaian government in Ghana for years to come. So this is some of the things you need to think about. A quick recap of it is relationship matters a lot, storytelling is quintessential, and above all, asking yourself, why me? Taking on this great idea, why now? And what are some of the measurable impacts you can actually use to convince the people you're asking for money to do something very simple, have an impact in the world, and above all, use that to move the frontiers of your ideas forward. With that said, I'll pass it back to Samir to really talk through at a high level some of the things you should think about, especially from a mental health standpoint, because the fundraising journey can be lonely sometimes, painful, but it takes a village for you to get to where you want to get to.
Thanks a lot, Abby. So, as Abby mentioned, fundraising is really hard. And sometimes the story of mental health doesn't get told because people will really fixate on the outcome, which is your organization or you receiving funding and being able to do something successfully. There might be a lot of PR and media. And what kind of gets lost in that narrative of almost lionizing entrepreneurship or building something is the toll that it takes on your mental health and other parts of your life. And while this isn't to dissuade you, I think it is important for us to discuss, how to approach this. And the best way to do this will be through two stories that I'll share with you. The first is going to be my first crowdfunding campaign ever, and the second will be Abbey and I's fundraising journey with Isusu this past year. The first time I ever did a crowdfunding campaign, I think, was in 2013, leading into 2014 with Transformation. And it started off great. We launched our campaign, people started donating. I was on a high because, people are contributing to your idea, you're getting words of encouragement. But, after a day, momentum starts to stutter. And then what's left is the hard work of constantly bringing more people into your campaign, building a funnel, and raising the donations that you receive so that you can kind of execute against this big idea or vision that you have that essentially your very identity is tied to often. And the mistake that I made was never thinking enough was enough. And so I would be up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., night after night, whether messaging my campaign to someone on Facebook, texting someone about it, finding a new partnership, right? And so that sort of mental space of just constantly thinking about fundraising and never feeling like enough was enough, just kind of starts to wear on your personal health. And 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks into sleepless nights, constantly thinking about nothing other than fundraising and always feeling like there's a little more that you can do, wasn't really a good formula for a healthy lifestyle. And this is important because at the end of the day, there's more to it than fundraising. You're still building an idea, you're still serving a community, and you still have a life that's important. And so, it's important that you put in some guardrails to avoid that. A couple quick tips to avoid this is one, set some boundaries for yourself. And so, make really targeted goals of I will do these 10 things, but don't let yourself leak on those. Like if you've sent out 100 emails like you planned, you don't need to do the extra 5 emails that night. Like make sure to take care of yourself because this is a marathon, not a sprint. And that's what's really important to remember over this fundraising process. And I think what I learned by going so over the top in those first few weeks, I felt extremely burnt out for the next few months. And that made the rest of it really difficult. And so the piece of advice is really treat this like a marathon and not a sprint. You'll wake up tomorrow, your fundraising will still be there, your organization will still be there. And it's important that along this journey, you do what you need to take care of yourself. And taking care of yourself means something different for everyone. But some of the things that were important for me was making sure that I was able to stay physically fit, that I was eating good food and drinking, lots of water, that I would spend and invest time in relationships with people that I care deeply for. Right? Those were the 2 or 3 things that really mattered to me that started to drop. And so when thinking about fundraising, just make sure that you understand what your kind of the things that you need to keep yourself healthy and whole are, and make sure to index on those. The second fundraising story I'll share a little bit about is, this past year when Abbey and I were raising money for Isusu, we started fundraising in January and had put together a large portion of our round, and then, due to some unfortunate circumstances, essentially lost a lot of our funding because of circumstances outside of our control with some of the institutions we were raising capital from. And at this stage, we had been bootstrapping without jobs and without really a stable paycheck for 16 months. And we're really at the end of our wits with our personal finances. Essentially, we had cashed out our 401ks and retirement accounts. We had couch surfed. We had done all sorts of hacks to make it work. And so for us to lose that kind of capital at that late stage was really, really tough. And, fortunately, we were able to kind of get back up because that's what you do as an entrepreneur and continue working with investors, build new relationships, and rebuild our round. But the real takeaway for us from this experience was really nothing worth doing is worth doing alone. And what really got both of us through it was the strength of our partnership as co-founders and co-CEOs, where we were able to lean on each other. And even on the worst of days, that there's at least one other person that feels like you do in this moment. And so the takeaway is really the people that you choose to build your business with is one of the most important decisions you'll ever make, because those are the people that will be with you on your highest days and the people that will be with you on your lowest days. And you want to make sure that they're people that you trust and that always have your back. And so, to recap quickly, the 2 takeaways are: one, remember that fundraising is a marathon, not a sprint. And 2, nothing worth doing is worth doing alone. So really make sure to invest in your co-founders, or if you don't have them, maybe your significant other, your family, or the village of people that are there to support you. Just make sure to really invest in those relationships and have people that you can lean on when things get tough. So with that, touch up on mental health, I'll pass it back over to Abbey to summarize some of our key fundraising tips, and then we'll close out this webinar.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Samir. So once again, folks, to reiterate, fundraising is all about, a marathon, not a sprint like Samir rightfully alluded to. We can't stress the importance of building the right relationships earlier on, because the people that know you will be the ones investing in your ideas. Your ideas, there are a plethora of ideas out there, but people invest in people. And that's true every time. Number 3, you need to have a plan. You need to have a plan and be prepared while you're doing it. Number 4, in addition to your plan, you need to have a strong story that essentially helps, humanizes, or talks about the impact, or why now, and why people should fund your idea. Number 5, mental health. The journey of raising capital is painful. There will be disappointments, and yes, you will fail. But the advice is, when you go down 7 times, get yourself back up, chin up, get back up the 8th time, and come back for more. And the most important thing is, this is not the end all be all, right? What you're doing is you're raising capital, you're in the Clinton Global Initiative, Commitment, University, community, and there are a lot of people out there looking to help you from your university resources. Tap into people and do not go at this alone. Ask people for help every time. Don't try to be, someone that wants to keep ideas to yourself, right? Just share, because the more you share, the more you learn. And the last thing is all about the people you do it with. The reason why Samir and I are having this conversation or sharing our experiences with you is because we had a cordial conversation at CGIU, even when we were running different companies at that point. But we ended up managing Isusu together, founding Isusu together, which is particularly powerful. So you never know what tomorrow will bring, and the power of fundraising is also underscored in that reality. It takes a village, and will end in a simple phrase. If you want to go fast, you can go alone, right? Try to do things on your own, but if you want to go far, you need team members, good co-founders, and a good support structure to get you to the promised land. Thank you so much for listening to the webinar. We're very, very excited. Feel free to reach out to us anytime. We're here to help you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take good care and good luck. We're here to support you.